Thank you very much for inviting me. It's lovely to be in such a beautiful city. It's not the first time. I was in Krakow, I think we decided about 27 years ago. So it's nice to see the castle is still here. So it's a beautiful city, so I'm really, really honored to be here. And as I was just talking before, it is really nice to be back face-to-face after 2 and a bit years of just giving talks online, which was great in some ways of reaching people, and if there are people online at the moment, it is great and hello. But at the same time, it has been lovely to be physically in a space, and I really hope it's an opportunity to have more conversations about this work or other work. So the talk is called Childhood in a Digital World, but I'll be the first to admit that my work is a very specific focus within that, because it is such a huge area. I mean, if we're honest, we're talking about children's futures, and there are so many different ways to look at that. So I will focus in on a particular area, but hopefully at the end I can zoom out a little bit. So one thing that's really interesting for me is to try and find out how people feel about children and technology, because very often it can arise emotions. We can feel, we have attitudes about children using technologies. Now, if we look at this picture here, we have a girl hugging a teddy bear. And that might feel nice and, it's very warm and cozy. And if I told you that teddy bear that girl has got is to help her because she has to go to hospital a lot, and she gets very nervous, and so she's given the teddy bear to physically hold and hug because it allows her to relax. So these sound like very positive, and many people will say this is a nice thing. But actually that picture there is taken from an article of a technology that's about 10 years old. It was a prototype that one of the problems they have of children going into hospitals and being nervous is they don't really like all the tests, their heart rate, their temperature, all these. So they decided that a really good way to be able to capture these measurements that didn't upset the children was to embed the technology inside something like a teddy bear. And so that teddy is called Teddy the Guardian. Now, I show that example for various reasons. One, because it highlights that sometimes we have to stop and think a little bit about when we define something as technology or not. I use the word technology to mean digital technology in my talk. It's a good way to reflect about our emotions, about how we feel about children interacting with what we think is technology and not. But most important is to highlight that things are evolving. And so when we talk about technology, very often we have a particular idea, and very often when people ask me, what do you think about children and technology? Or I ask people, what do you feel about children and technology? This is more like what they may have in mind, children interacting with a screen. And that's understandable because at the moment, screens are becoming more and more ubiquitous. More and more children are using screens in some places in the world, not everywhere, but it's becoming more familiar. More and more designs are for children. A research study, I think, in 2012 by Sesame Street showed that more than 60% of apps for learning are for children in the early years, preschool children. And when people say, well, is technology good for children? It's a very common question I get asked, but it is a really complex question for many different reasons. And so the answer I give is it depends, which is a very academic answer. It means we don't have to commit to an answer. We just say, it depends on many factors. Okay, so what does it depend on? Well, first of all, like many things, it depends on context. So children are not just sitting there, them and the technology, with no context around them. They're very often there with someone else. In that picture, the child was there with a sibling, or there may be an adult there. There may be other things around. There may be other toys. The device may be used as part of a wider play space. But then you have to think about the wider context. Why are children using that technology? What's the attitude of the parent? What's the parent doing? As the children are there, is the parent sitting and watching and smiling, or are they using their mobile phone to look at something? So there are so many different factors that influence if children are using a technology and how they're using the technology. But it also depends upon definitions. What do you mean by good for? That's your values. If we don't have a shared set of values, that can mean something very different. And in my area where people ask questions like, well, okay, is it good for social interaction? Well, what do we mean? Because our definitions of things like social interaction, of play, of learning, they change, they evolve as technology evolves. So when we talk about, is technology good for play? Well, that's not an easy question, given that children now play with technology, and technology is part of play. So it's not like a pill. You can't test whether technology improves or hinders social interaction in the same way as you might with a pill. And in my area of learning, it's very difficult because more and more children's world and the way they interact, the way our jobs, the way we work, we are using technology. So to ask the question, is technology good for learning, is a problematic question. But clearly, technologies vary. And some are designed in ways that do encourage the types of things we would like. There are technologies designed really nicely, so they have opportunities for children to interact with others. In the UK, for example, technologies like Minecraft create these virtual spaces that's really easy for children to play together or at a distance. There's a lot of work looking at how technologies can support or hinder things like creativity. So creativity itself is a difficult term, but there are some technologies that really give children opportunities to express themselves, very often express themselves in ways they can't using other different types of materials. They can try out new ideas in ways you can't. Going back to my example of Minecraft, you can see what happens when you build towers that go into the clouds. You can play with ideas, and others that aren't. And very often, the ones that often sell well may not necessarily be so great for creativity. It's very easy to design a technology that just asks you a question. If you get it right, it rewards you. If you're wrong, it's not, you don't do so well in the game. So it gamifies a very old way of testing and practicing ideas that's not so creative. There's an expression in the world of design that very often these types of technologies are chocolate-coated broccoli. The idea being that they look lovely and shiny and they've got lovely sounds and animations and effects, all the chocolate, but really what they're doing is disguising underneath some broccoli that children don't really want. So it is really complex, and that's why it makes it very difficult to answer. But where my focus of my research is not so much those areas, but I'm very interested in how children interact with the technology itself. So here's a picture, a bit of a strange picture. And just have a little think for a second what that picture may represent. Now this picture was from a research article written in 2004, and it's called How a Computer Sees Us. So if you imagine, if you are interacting with a computer using a mouse, from the computer point of view, you are a finger on a hand. You have eyes, because you can see, but just one. It's very flat. You can hear, but it doesn't know if you can talk. It doesn't know if you've got a body. Okay? So according to our interaction through something like a mouse, which is still very common, we are reduced to this. Now, screens, great, much more interaction, much more direct interaction, but really, Brett Victor describes screens as sliding pictures under glass. It's still very reduced compared to the very, very rich interaction that we have with the world. But that is now, and it is changing. And it is changing faster now than it has ever changed before. So what we have here is a design, Tiggly, where it is a screen, but you actually interact with physical shapes, and you put the shapes onto the screen. You have devices that can capture the physical world and augment it, or to take the physical world and put it into the screen, and vice versa. You have designs that can respond to the way you move your hands, gesture recognition. You have designs such as the one below where they're screens, but you physically manipulate the screens. And I'll show you a little clip in a second of that design. You suddenly have tangible technologies where the technology is properly integrated into the physical object. So anyone who talked before about comparing physical and digital interaction doesn't make sense because the two are together. We have examples, as I showed at the beginning, where the technology is integrated to everyday things, the Internet of Toys. And on the far right, we have examples more and more where you can interact with technology just through using your mind. And people are looking at ways of how to use that. And very often, as with most technologies, we start with very good reasons. So, for example, children who find it very difficult to calm down and to rest their brain, there are games that encourage them to relax by gamifying your brain patterns. And it helps the children relax. And I'll show a clip of what I'm talking about from one of the projects that we were looking at that was looking at the relationship between physical toys and digital information as a way for children to communicate through physical objects.
Right, can you tell me about this? Who did that?
Who's that? That's my son.
Yeah.
Do you want to put this on instead? Take that off and put the toy on.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah.
And what is it?
Can you put the soft toy on?
Special.
Happy Zahra. Sorry we couldn't make it to see you due to COVID. I hope.
Okay. Now, a question you may ask there is, well, why do you need that? You've got a physical toy. You don't need to do anything like that. And these are really good questions. We must always ask these questions because very often designers' answer is, it looks cool. And if people buy it and it looks cool, that's a win. From a more critical perspective, we have to ask, what value for children does it add? Now, what we're interested in there is the way that gives children very easy control to create their own videos and share information and also to listen and hear other people. So more independent communication. So what is really interesting, and one of the things I do love about technology, is very often it gets us to ask questions that go beyond the technology. Questions we've had before, but technology raises them. It gives them more importance. And so because technology, our interaction with technology is evolving, we have to ask, well, what is the importance? Why do we need to physically interact with the world? What is the value of physically interacting with things? What is lost if we don't and we just use screens? What could we possibly do if we can harness this physical interaction with new technologies? And this underpins my research, but looking more specifically at what does physical interaction bring for young children? And that's an interesting question because it's a question we've had for many, many years, for decades, ever since Frederick Froebel, the founder of the kindergarten, created physical designs for children to learn ideas like maths. People have believed that young children benefit from playing hands-on with physical things. And if you have young children, or you walk into a little nursery or school, you will see many, many physical things that children are playing with, and there is a belief that these things are good. But that's maybe because we didn't have options, and that was the only thing we had. But we need to answer these questions if we're to understand the influence of new technologies. So this is the bit where you get to make me look very silly, because I'm going to ask you to do something now, okay? So hopefully, if you are sitting next to somebody, or somebody's just behind you, or just in front of you, I would like you to talk to them, and I'd like you to solve a maths problem, okay? So can I ask people, and if somebody can help me with this one, I'm going to ask people in the audience. One person is to ask the other person this sum. What is 1 plus 8? Could you please do this? Okay. Now, I've heard great things about Poland. And because audio didn't work, I'm not quite sure if you told people, but my family historically comes from Poland, so I'm very proud, and I'm hoping that the answer. So, which way am I going? How do I go backwards? I'm hoping you got to the answer 9. And if you got to the answer 9, could you now have a go at answering this one? And you're going to need less time, because some of you may have got that is also 9, okay, which is great. If you didn't get 9, now's probably a good time to stop, But if you did get 9, then can you ask and answer this question? Why does 1 plus 8 make the same as 2 plus 7? So if you just explain to the person next to you why do they make the same? Why do they both make 9? Okay. So when I ask this question, about half the audience explain with their words, because that's what you're expected to do, but they will also use their hands. And as I looked around, most of you were also using your hands. Why? We're adults, it's a simple question. We have the right words. Why are we using our hands to describe something? Because numbers are very abstract. They're abstract because they can refer to anything. One car, one sound, one galaxy. So why are we using our hands to talk about numbers? So I asked this question to student teachers and to children. And this is the type of thing they do when they explain. And in the videos, I want you to look at their hands and see if it makes sense. See if you can work out what their hands are telling you.
Why 1 add 8 makes the same as 2 add 7?
Because you could take 1 away from the 8 and put it on the other side to the 1, making 2 plus 7. So sharing power.
Okay.
Okay. So from an abstract maths point of view, that was weird. You can't grab a piece of a number and tear it off. But if you think about numbers as a collection of objects, it makes a lot of sense. You take 1, you take it off, put it on the other side. Okay? So the hands are telling you a lot about the way that she is thinking about numbers. She's thinking about numbers as if they were a collection of objects that you can move from one group to another. Here's a video of a child, and you'll see a similar gesture, but you'll see something else the child does that tells us something else about the way they're thinking about numbers. The video also will hopefully show you the challenges of doing research in this area, because children aren't quite as clear, and they do lots more things, and when you've got to video code 150 children, it takes a long time.
Because if you have 1 and 6, that would go to 7, and 5 is 1 less than 6, so, and 2 is the same, and 8, if you took 6, and it would be very complicated if you had 6 and 5. That would make 11.
Fantastic, very clever.
So we saw that pinching. The child did the pinching. But they also started putting their hands on the table. 5 and 6 and 11. That doesn't make sense. The 11 doesn't sit there. But it makes a lot of sense. If you were brought up culturally thinking of numbers along a line where you start off with 0 and you go left to right, that is a cultural experience, but it is a very shared one, and it's one that gives us meaning. And it means if I talk to you and I do that, you will understand what I'm talking about. So from a cognitive point of view, this is really, really interesting, because what is happening is we're able to look at the hands to be able to see what is happening in the mind in the way that you cannot just from the way that someone voices things. And this has big implications. It has implications for the way that we decide what children know and what they don't. But it also allows us to understand how certain experiences are shaping the way that people think about different ideas. And this theoretical area is called embodied cognition. It is very difficult to summarize an area of research that has come through philosophy to cognitive science to learning sciences and to education, especially as it's an umbrella term that captures many different theories, and evidence is still building and people disagree. But at the heart of embodied cognition is an argument that goes against the dominant way we think about the mind. Ever since Descartes, we have considered the mind as being separate from the body. What we now know is that when we are thinking, we are activating parts of our brains that are to do with the way we sense and we move. We are activating experiences. We're encoding experiences, and these structure the way we think about things. And embodied cognition solves a very important problem, and that's the problem of symbolic grounding. Humans are able to think about very symbolic terms, like infinity, like numbers. And how do we do that? How can they be meaningful? And what embodiment does is it says, well, they're meaningful because when we think about these ideas, we are drawing upon experiences. Now, some people will say, well, that can't be true. I can talk about pink elephants. I've never seen one. Yes, but you do have a grounded experience of seeing pink, and you have probably seen or experienced elephants. So you can bring these together, and that's a very amazing part of human creativity, our ability to bring things together, but still in a very embodied way. And the reason that gestures are interesting is because gestures are observable. So instead of sort of brain scans and these complex experiments that we look to investigate embodiment, gestures provides us a really good way to be able to see what type of experiences may be influencing the way you think about things. Most of us gesture. We gesture when we're talking to somebody, but we also gesture when we're on the phone and they cannot see us. A child who's born blind will still gesture talking to another child who's blind. So yes, gestures are about social communication, but we now know that the prime function of gestures is for yourself. You create them because the way you're thinking, these types of experiences structure your ideas. And this allows us to think about many things, not just about everyday objects that we see and hold, but very abstract ideas, because we can use metaphors. So if I talk about time, for example, I can talk about the future. I can talk about the past. Now, the future is not something physically in front of me. That's just a metaphor. I'm using space. The behind is not the past. But most of us think like that. And I say most of us because there is research showing that there are tribes, people, where it's the other way around. The past is something you know because you have witnessed it. You can see the past. The future is unknown. It's behind us. So even that is a cultural thing. But it provides us with a metaphor that we can talk about something as abstract as time. And we can talk about things like love, being close to somebody emotionally, the feelings it gives us. We can have a very grounded experience of what we mean by love. Justice, being like a balance. These are metaphors based on experience that we allow us to think about ideas. But this has a very interesting implication for education, because what it suggests is to think about and help somebody to understand ideas. It matters what type of experiences, what type of sensory and what type of physical experiences they have in the world. So here's just a couple of videos. Again, looking at their hands when they explain. And the people were videoing, yes, they knew we were videoing, but when we asked them afterwards, they didn't know why. They thought we were just videoing as you do in an interview. They didn't know we were looking at their hands. So the first video is somebody talking about friction. So you can have a guess what type of gestures they may do to talk about friction. But what was really interesting as a researcher coding it is the timing. Very often the gesture would come before they said the words. Very often they draw upon the experience and it helps structure the way they talk. They talk about friction, but they also talk about things like heat. They also talk about surface texture.
Behind the concept of friction. Whoa, friction, okay. So friction is a force, and it's generated when two surfaces rub against each other, and sometimes you can get heat as well, released during that kind of interaction. More friction is generated when the properties of the surface result in different amounts of friction. So if it's kind of a rough surface, then you might get more friction generated, or if it's a smooth surface, you wouldn't get as much friction generated. Friction's helpful because if not, you'd fall over every time.
Okay, so a range of gestures, not just with the hands. Pardon? I don't understand. Oh, I'm sorry. I've confused everyone. Thank you very much. Friction, not fraction. That's what happens when you ride the slides on an aeroplane. The next one is algorithm. Thank you very much for pointing that out. The next one is algorithm, and it is algorithm.
Algorithms are used in computer science and maths. So it's when you follow certain amount of steps to get a desired answer.
Okay, cool.
So that one was very short, and the reason we did this study is because computer science is seen as something very, very abstract ideas. But out of 16 people we interviewed and asked them about algorithms and data and all these computing concepts, all of them bar one person used their hands a lot. They talked about algorithms, something that happens over time. They talked about bits of code, like they're physical things. So they were using these metaphors to talk about their understanding of what algorithms were. So I now just want to show a project that I've been working on for the last 5 years. It's funded in America by the National Science Foundation, in the UK by the Wellcome Trust and the Economic Social Research Council, and it had partners in the US and the UK. So in the UK, I led the UK side of things, working very closely with Glasgow Science Centre, with the University College London, the Science Museum, and Learning Landscapes. And what we were doing in this project is we were trying to understand what was the importance of physical exhibits. You can see everything online. Why go to a science centre? Why play with the things there? And it's particularly important for science centres because they have to justify very often why they're not school. What do they offer? And they often talk about physical experiences. Well, why is that important for learning? So that's why we had a shared research interest. And what we did is we did a lot of observation, sometimes just watching and coding. Other times, you can see here, this is a small example of using video equipment to be able to code in detail the way that children and adults were talking, moving their bodies, where they were looking, the way they were gesturing. And I'm going to show you something I prepared earlier. So this was a video to communicate this research project. It also gives me a time to have my little glass of water.
3 ways embodied learning can improve informal science learning. Have you ever noticed the different ways that children show us what they're thinking? Perhaps how they move or gesture?
Research is now revealing how particular body-based experiences underpin the way we think and understand the world.
Science ideas are not static memories stored in our brains. They are a dynamic activity involving our brain, bodies, and the world around us. This research draws attention to how meaningful interaction can shape learning.
We call this embodied learning.
Science centres and museums already provide engaging, interactive experiences. Embodied learning research suggests several ways we can expand these experiences to support children's science learning.
Encourage children to communicate through gesture and movement.
Embodied learning research encourages us to consider the diverse ways that children communicate what they understand.
Their actions may indicate they are making a prediction. Maybe their hands illustrate ideas they are struggling to put into words.
Sometimes it may help children if you encourage them to show you what they understand.
Encourage adults to scaffold science ideas through gesture.
Adults naturally communicate science ideas through their hands. This can help children understand, connect with a topic, and even create their own meaningful gestures.
Think, how would you use your hands to communicate ideas such as gravity, water flow, virus, or balance?
It may help children, therefore, for adults to be more purposeful in using gestures that are closely linked to the content being investigated. For this, facilitators could be trained in the concept of embodied learning and representational gestures specifically.
Design experiences to encourage meaningful movements.
With embodied learning, we can focus on the movements and gestures that are key features of the concept, rather than just encouraging movement for movement's sake. In exhibit design, it is therefore important to encourage movements that relate to the science idea, as well as what is natural and intuitive for visitors.
Here it helps to ask, how will children's interactions with the exhibit help them communicate science ideas later? New technologies, by responding to children's actions, offer exciting new possibilities for encouraging embodied learning.
So, Next time you are thinking about how to help children learn in your science centre or museum, pay attention to how they use their hands and bodies. Help them move to learn.
So that project there, we are now we're now moving to look at schools and the significance of what we found in science centres in schools. So I'll just very quickly summarise those 3 points that came from the video. So we know that children, very often, especially young children, they struggle to share their ideas verbally. And that's been a real big problem in psychology because more and more we realise by using new methods that young children know things that we didn't thought they knew. Because if we depend upon what they write, that's really, really hard. You know? If what they say, still quite hard. What they draw, quite hard. But if we start looking at other ways, like the way they act, what they do, how they use their hands when they communicate ideas, it gives us a richer picture of what children do. And that's when we don't ask them. We just say, tell us, and they automatically do it. So what would happen if we actually encourage children who struggle, show us using your hands? And this may be particularly useful for children who struggle verbally. So some children, before they get to school, are very good at talking because they have parents who know education and will talk to them in very educational ways, get children to explain, oh, you know, why did that apple fall out of the tree? And they practice that. Other children from more disadvantaged families may not have practiced that, but may still have really rich experiences that they understand of the world. So this video here, we've got 3 children talking. The one in the center is more confident and gesturing a lot, but have a look at the one furthest to the right and how she is looking at the hands of her friend and how she even copies a bit.
And then the bell went around, and then the bubble was in the middle. And we just had to scale to the other side, but we didn't get it. We just kind of hit the top, and then it would come down across the way, but then we thought.
So I forgot to say at the beginning of that what they were actually talking about. So they were talking about a balance board, and they were using their hands to talk about the balance, and the other child was looking at her like that. The video also shows it was the beginning bit of the research before we learned how to use microphones attached to children, and so you can see the audio is really bad. That's why we subtitled it, and it's mostly the hands to look at. The second one was about adults. So people generally gesture. It depends on many factors. Depends on culture, depends on whether you're sitting down or standing up, depends on who you're talking to. We know that teachers in particular gesture a lot, and they're often aware they gesture, but haven't really thought about it. Now, given the potential significance of the way they use their hands, this is quite interesting, that maybe we can think more about how we communicate ideas. And it's not just children, teachers of young children. You go to a university and look at the person talking about very complex ideas and look at the way they use their hands to articulate ideas. So here we've got a couple of videos. Now, the first one is the practitioner. I talk about gesture a lot, but it's not just gesture. It's the way we move our bodies. And look at how she uses her bodies to help children draw their attention to certain things. And we can do that very often. We can draw people's attention by looking or moving our bodies. We can communicate to somebody if we want them to talk, whether we're not interested. It really structures the communication. The second video is a parent who's with a child, and afterwards we asked the child to tell us a bit of their understanding of what they were doing, and it was a bit complex, and so the parent helped her, but look at the way they use their hands to help the child. So using gestures to really help draw children's attention by pointing and looking, and also to represent key ideas.
And there's a bubble in the middle.
No, they do. So when you put the blocks on different sides, what does it do? What does the board do? It tilts up and down, it turns around. And what was underneath it, do you remember? Do you remember there was a little thing, like a pivot, which it bends around all sides, doesn't it?
And that was very important for the Science Centre because one of the things this raises is what the Science Centre can do is provide these very rich experiences that allow the conversations to happen afterwards by representing some of the actions that children did. The final one about design experiences, they don't have to be digital. We have very rich experiences and educators are very good at creating rich experiences for children. But technology does raise new possibilities that we can create those experiences and use the technology maybe to make it a bit more fun, to give feedback, to draw attention to different ideas. So this is one design from that project called the Embodied Balance. And the other one was from a previous project looking at the way that children think about numbers and how you can integrate color into physical objects to help children see different numerical patterns.
Let's see if he gets this right. Yeah.
So that Nambucco there is also a good example of why would you do that? You know, what is the importance of physical interaction? Because if you have an iPad and you look up Nambucco, there is a free app, and it's really easy to program on an app. To put color, to get blocks that can count themselves is very hard in the physical world. Why do it? Well, if physical interaction and moving objects around is key to the way we think about numbers, it could be very valuable. So in summary, research is revealing the importance of sensory, so how we smell, touch, feel the world, and action, the way we move, in how children and adults think, learn, and communicate. This has important implications for the way we communicate ideas and the types of experiences that we provide children. And it also has implications for how children interact with technology. I just now want to show a little bit extra that is some of the implications of this for a project that we started and we're building. And that is us thinking about how do we help children learn about data? Because data is a very abstract idea. So when children are playing with that toy, they can feel the toy. They can't see the data. The data is invisible. The data is like a black box. Now, think about how would you communicate data? If you listen to our language, we don't talk about it like it's abstract. We talk about holding your data, storing your data, giving your data. We talk about it like it's a physical thing, but it's not. It's very abstract. You can't really see it. But it's not just a theoretical question, it's also a very important question, because more and more we are creating things for children and for all people that capture data. It could be a toothbrush that gamifies how you brush your teeth in the morning. And we all know as parents how hard it is to get children to brush their teeth. You now have an app and a toy. Little robots that have facial recognition. Hello Barbie, a doll that not just you can play with, you can talk to, and it intelligently communicates back using artificial intelligence. Cameras that can help keep your children safe. Watches that can track how much exercise children are doing. Now, I'm pretty sure that at least one of these would evoke a slightly negative response. You know, there's something not quite right there. Often it's the camera, but it has a very powerful message. Do you want your children to be safer? Do you want to know where they are? Do you want them to help do some exercise? Do you want to make sure they're brushing their teeth? Do you want them to play and enjoy themselves? These are very emotional things that as parents you want, and these are some of the technologies that are satisfying that need. But these technologies are capturing a lot of rich data that can tell a lot about children. Now, I'm not here to make any claims about any of these products and what they're doing with the data. We're just making the point that we are capturing very rich data from young children because we're with their consent. Now, their consent is because they haven't complained, but do they really give their consent if they're not quite sure what data is? So in this project, and I welcome you if you are on the internet to have a look, we are looking at how young can you help children understand data. And we believe that by giving children very personal experiences, things that are meaningful to them, we can help them. If you have a teddy that you can squeeze, you can hold, you can move. And as you do that, it shows you representations of data. You can learn. If you start asking questions such as, wow, does it look like Teddy's done a lot of exercise? Yes. Oh, here's one from yesterday. Do you think Teddy was doing lots of exercise? No, Teddy didn't do any exercise. He was very lazy yesterday. You can start talking, making stories with children to help them. But you don't need to design something, because we have designs around us that are very rich and really help us to talk and help children understand data, and that's the world. Because now, when you go shopping, you don't give cash, you bleep your card or your phone. When you want to dry your hands, you don't take paper, you just put your hands underneath. Soon, when you want to drive, you'll just sit in your car and it will take you. So we live more and more in a datafied world. And in many ways, this is scary, but this is children's world, and it's not scary for them, it's just the way things are. It's the way the world is happening. But as adults, what it does provide is a really, really rich context to have conversations, maybe to gesture, to help children to understand ideas of data. And when people say, okay, from what age? Well, I say, imagine if you ask them about reading. We know that children probably can't decode words on a page till they're about 4, 5, depends. But when would you start reading a story to children? Would you wait till then, or would you start reading to them young because it's an important cultural ability to be able to read stories? And so here's a little video of my 2-year-old trying to get through a door and failing. Now, was that magic because the door liked his mum and didn't like him? Or was it actually because there's a sensor and he was in the wrong place? And he learned very quickly what you have to do. That sensor captures him, is able to detect and respond to him. He can control that once he knows what to do. That sensor has information that the door opened. That information tells you how many times that door opened, how many people, which days did it open more. There's so many conversations just about something that we take for granted every day. So I finished by asking the question to myself, how do I feel about children and technology? I am worried in many ways. I'm worried that the speed it's happening means we feel very disempowered and we see many things happening and we just want everything to slow down. But it's not going to slow down. It's just going to speed up. And so what we do need to be doing as adults is being a bit more confident and going, okay, I may not understand all of it, but I do understand some things, and I do have values, and that's something I can talk and share to children. And actually, in many ways, as long as we feel we can introduce children, help them be aware of certain things, and maybe even influence some of the designs and laws around us that control or influence what technologies children have in their worlds, then actually it could be a very positive thing that can have a very positive impact on children's childhood. Thank you.